Last week, the Colonial pipeline in the United States was shut down by a ransomware attack, basically setting off chaos in the southeast United States as everybody scrambled to fuel up their car, and consumers very quickly cleaned out 17,000 gas stations. Now it'll be back up and running. It is partly now, and it'll be basically sorted out next week. But you know, there are some lessons to be learned for infrastructure, including electricity infrastructure. So we're going to talk to David Masson of DarkTrace. Welcome to the interview, David.
Nice to be here. How are you, Markham?
I'm just fine, thank you. What's your take on what happened to that pipeline?
Based on the reporting that's come out, and I'll be honest with you, some of the details are a bit scant and more is coming out with every day. It would appear to be there was a ransomware attack on their IT, not their OT, on their IT side. But based on the scale of the attack and out of an abundance of caution to avoid the ransomware spreading to their OT, to the pipeline itself, they then shut that pipeline down.
Right, and my understanding is they went through the billing software.
I'm not entirely sure how it's come in, how it was actually delivered, but it obviously got onto the network in some way. I'm going to guess some of it might have been, maybe some external software, good old-fashioned supply chain attack, and that's been quite a hot ticket number recently, or just good old-fashioned somebody clicked on a link in an email. I'm not entirely sure yet.
Now, the company initially denied that it had paid any money to the Russian criminals who initiated the attack, but today we see reports that they had in fact paid $5 million. Is that common that companies acquiesce to the demands and actually pay the ransomware attackers?
Statistics are hard to come by on who's paid and who hasn't paid for kind of obvious reasons. A lot of them do with reputational damage. But I saw a few indicators in the press yesterday and this morning that they paid $5 million last Friday, actually, when the attack took place. Why did they do it? Well, none of us were there. We don't know what panic was going on at the time. Clearly, whatever happened was major enough for them to shut their pipeline down. And as you pointed out, it's a clearly very, very critical part of America's critical national infrastructure. So in that panic, in the desire to try and get things back online or to find some solution to what they were doing, somebody made the decision to pay, and they did.
Now, the question arises, of course, what can other pieces of the energy infrastructure do to avoid that? And so we're thinking other pipelines and electric power grids, that sort of thing. What tips or advice would you give someone like the operator of the Colonial pipeline?
Well, it's going to seem rather obvious what I'm about to say is, but don't get ransomware. Don't get hacked in the first place. Actually deploy two things. It's education of your workforce and then good technology. So when it comes to social engineering, which is the way most of these attacks are deployed, do run phishing awareness campaigns with staff. Give them a chance, train them, give them a chance so they can avoid these incidents if that's what it was. But at the same time, you've got to deploy some really good technology these days. Technology will actually tell you that there's something wrong in its very, very early stages, and perhaps you'll be able to stop it before it spreads, or technology that will find it in its very, very early stages and then stop it, actually buying back some time. So you get a bit of thinking time so you can decide what you're actually going to do.
Now, cybersecurity has been an issue for some time. In your experience, do you find that most operators of infrastructure have A, trained their staff, and B, have the necessary software in place?
Well, what we're looking at here is what's commonly called IT and OT convergence. And I think you and I spoke about the last time we met. On the IT side, education is better. Cyber hygiene is better than it was in the past. But on the OT side, we're talking about engineering, and sometimes that's not really there because OT engineers don't consider cyber hygiene to be their issue because they're engineers. They're there to run engineering, not to manage IT and not to manage cybersecurity. So you can often find a skills gap there, particularly if you end up with OT guys in charge of IT and at the same time IT people in charge of OT. You end up with that kind of skills gap, and obviously when there's a gap in knowledge, that can get exploited by threat actors.
So what about on the software side? Are enough companies employing, the modern software?
It's patchy, let's be honest about it. it's patchy. A lot of it is to do with not necessarily an understanding of the scale of the threat that we all face. Some of it's down to not entirely sure what it is that they actually want to protect at the end of the day. Although in critical national infrastructure, people usually kind of realize we've got to protect the grid, we've got to protect the pipeline, whatever it is. And also sometimes it's down to just budget. You know, we've only got so much, what we're going to spend it on, what can we afford to do, what can we protect? And it can lead to a patchy response to the scale of threat that we currently face.
Now, I see that President Biden is promising some sort of action by the American government to address cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. I mean, what can governments do? What the Canadian government do to protect the Canadian infrastructure?
History kind of shows that quite often the spur to get organizations to protect themselves is being told to and being legally forced to. So President Biden hasn't just announced that a 100-day sprint to improve protection of critical national infrastructure. As of yesterday, he issued one of those presidential executive orders that basically says, you've got to do this. You actually got to get on it and do it. We don't have a similar process here in Canada. In fact, we have no law that says you have to be protected. Most people protect themselves because, you know, it's a good idea to do it at the end of the day, or based on the insurance that they've got themselves. The insurance will be saying, you know, we will insure you, but you've got to play your part in protecting yourself at the same time. But quite often, it tends to be a major incident that drives legislation that then forces organizations to actually do something about it. But we've seen a lot of it in the privacy space over the last few years. So in Canada, we've got PIPEDA. We just saw in California, the CCPA come out, and everybody will remember the European Union's GDPR. But that was really more to do with privacy protection rather than security. Whereas President Biden's recent executive order, that's pretty much about security, protecting critical national infrastructure.
Now, I've read some articles about how cybersecurity is part of the new emerging Cold War, and we're seeing state-sponsored or state actors. China is often accused, Russia's often accused of undertaking these kinds of attacks. Is that something that's happening now? And if it is, are we expecting it to ramp up in the future?
Well, attribution is very difficult to do, and really it takes the resources of a nation state to do that correctly. A good example of that would be last summer when Canada, America, and Britain basically pointed the finger at Russia for trying to steal COVID vaccine research. So that's a pretty obvious, yep, they're doing it, they've been told it, and three members of three very important countries have said so. But yes, countries will promote or protect their national interests in the ways that they consider is going to work best for them. I remember there's some old phrase about how war is just another, it's diplomacy or politics by another means. And so in this case, increasingly you'll find some states, some organizations, groups will use cyber to promote or protect or do things that they think will promote, protect their actual national interests. And the great thing about cyber is it's an asymmetrical force. You can be a very small player in this game, but with cyber, you can bring down the Goliaths. And obviously some countries, some organizations will resort to doing that.
Any final thoughts, David, on cybersecurity and where we're going over the next few years to deal with this issue?
There's two things that are actually coming up in the near future, and I think we're going to pay attention to both of them. One's going to be the introduction of 5G, which is really going to speed everything up. It's going to take the human ability to understand and manage computer networks from just about manageable to no longer able to manage it. It's too much for human beings to do because of the speed. And at the same time, so as a company, we use AI to protect networks. You're going to find the threat actors themselves are going to start to use AI. And at that point, you can't put humans in the game. You can't bring humans to an AI fight. You've got to start using AI and technology to beat that speed, beat that sophistication, beat the scale of the threats that are coming to us. And this is pretty much going to happen. 5G will be a great benefit to us all, and as is AI, but these things always are double-edged swords, and they can have negative consequences as well.
So you had mentioned two, that was number one, I take it. Is there a number two?
Oh, sorry, 5G number one, AI number two.
Gotcha. David, thank you very much. Always appreciate your insights.
See you next time.